Picture this. The year is 1900. The Mediterranean Sea stretches endlessly beneath a burning Greek sun, its surface shimmering like hammered bronze. Below those glittering waves, in the cold darkness 60 meters down, lies a secret that has waited for 2,000 years. A secret wrapped in coral, buried in time, hidden from the world above. A group of sponge divers, weathered men with calloused hands and lungs trained to defy death, descends into the abyss near a small, rocky island. An island so insignificant that few maps even bothered to name it. Antikythera, between Crete and mainland Greece. A speck of limestone rising from the sea, separating the Aegean from the Mediterranean proper. The divers are searching for sponges, simple, ancient work. The same work their fathers did, and their fathers before them. But on this particular dive, Captain Dimitrios Kondos surfaces gasping, his eyes wide with something that looks like terror or wonder, perhaps both. "Bodies," he says, breathless. "Naked bodies, arms reaching up from the sea floor, horses, a city of the dead." His crew thinks he's lost his mind. Nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep. But when others descend, they see it too. Not bodies, but statues. Bronze limbs green with age, marble torsos scattered across a slope of rock and sand. This is no natural formation. This is a shipwreck. But not just any shipwreck. This vessel went down sometime between 70 and 60 BCE, during the golden twilight of the Hellenistic age. It was carrying a treasure beyond measure. Bronze sculptures, glassware, jewellery, luxury goods bound for Rome. The spoils of conquered Greece, destined for the villas of Roman elites who hungered for Greek culture even as they subjugated Greek lands. The Greek government, newly independent after centuries of Ottoman rule, sees opportunity. National pride, archaeological significance. They commission a 9-month expedition to salvage what they can. It's dangerous work. One diver dies, 2 are paralysed forever by the bends. But they bring up wonder after wonder. The bronze arm of a philosopher, the head of a bearded god, fragments of a past that seems impossibly refined, impossibly sophisticated. And then, among the corroded bronze and marble, buried in a mass of calcified rock no bigger than a shoebox, something else. Something that shouldn't exist. It's easy to miss. Just a lump of bronze and wood, fused together by 2 millennia beneath the sea. The archaeologists catalogue it simply. Item 1587. They set it aside, more interested in the beautiful statues, the artistic masterworks. This corroded chunk looks like nothing, like the remains of some mechanical device, perhaps. Maybe part of the ship itself. But as it dries in the Athens Museum, something happens. It cracks, and inside, gears, dozens of them. Precisely cut bronze gears, their teeth still visible despite the centuries, meshed together in a configuration that speaks of deliberate design, of mathematical precision, of knowledge that the ancient world, according to everything historians believed, simply did not possess. The scholars are baffled. Some think it's an astrolabe, a known ancient instrument for measuring celestial positions. Others suggest it might be a modern intrusion, perhaps dropped by a passing ship centuries later. The easiest answer? Ignore it. File it away. Focus on the art, the pottery, the objects that fit comfortably within our understanding of what ancient people could and couldn't do. But the gears don't go away. They sit there, silent and insistent, asking a question that will echo across the entire 20th century and into our own time. What else did they know? What else have we forgotten? Welcome, fellow travellers, to a journey that will shatter everything you thought you knew about ancient technology, about human progress, about the supposedly primitive people of the past. Welcome to the story of the Antikythera Mechanism, a name that sounds cold, scientific, almost sterile. But don't be fooled. This is not a story about a machine. This is a story about us, about what we're capable of, about knowledge lost and found, about the dangerous myth of linear progress, the comforting lie that tells us we're smarter, more advanced, more capable than all who came before. The Antikythera Mechanism is a computer, not like your laptop or smartphone perhaps, but a computer nonetheless. An analog calculating device of such staggering complexity that when it was first properly understood in the 1970s and 80s, scientists couldn't believe what they were seeing. It's been called the most important scientific instrument of antiquity. It's been called impossible. It's been called proof that ancient people possessed technology that wouldn't be replicated for another 1,500 years. And it's been called something else too, by those who prefer their mysteries wrapped in conspiracy, evidence of lost civilizations, of knowledge from Atlantis or Lemuria, of extraterrestrial intervention, of time travelers leaving behind their tools. But the truth is somehow even more extraordinary than fiction, because the Antikythera Mechanism tells us that the ancient Greeks, those philosophers and mathematicians we read about in dusty textbooks, those poets and playwrights whose words still move us, possessed a tradition of precision engineering, of astronomical calculation, of mechanical computation that we never imagined. That alongside their marble temples and bronze statues, they were building machines, devices to decode the cosmos, tools to predict the future itself, written in the movements of the heavens. And then it was all lost. The knowledge, the techniques, the very concept that such things were possible. For more than a millennium, humanity forgot. The gears stopped turning, the calculations ceased, the machines crumbled to dust, and with them went the understanding of how to build them. Until a group of sponge divers, searching for simple treasures in the deep, brought up from the darkness a reminder of what we once were, and what we might become again. Over the next 2 hours, we will dive, metaphorically and intellectually, into the depths of this mystery. We will travel back to ancient Greece at its zenith, when philosopher-scientists looked up at the stars and saw not gods, but gears. When they understood that the universe itself was a mechanism, operating by laws that could be discovered, calculated, predicted. We will witness the long, frustrating decades after its discovery, when the mechanism sat in museums, studied by a handful of obsessed researchers who couldn't quite unlock its secrets. When the scientific establishment dismissed it as impossible, or insisted it must be simpler than it appeared. We will experience the breakthroughs, the X-rays, the CT scans, the patient work of decoding inscriptions too small to see with the naked eye, that finally revealed what this device could do, and what it tells us about the world that made it. And we will ask the questions that matter most. Why did this knowledge disappear? Could this mechanism have changed history if it hadn't been lost to the sea? And what else lies waiting in sunken ships and buried libraries, in collapsed temples and desert ruins? Knowledge that might reshape our understanding not just of the past, but of the possible. Because here's what the Antikythera Mechanism ultimately proves. The march of human progress is not a straight line ascending from primitive ignorance to modern enlightenment. It's a spiral, a cycle of discovery and loss, of building and forgetting, of reaching heights and falling, sometimes for centuries. We are not the first technological civilization, we're just the latest, and if we're not careful, we might not be the last. The gears are turning again, fellow travellers. The calculations begin. Let us follow them backward through time, to a world of brilliant minds and mechanical dreams, to a moment when humanity grasped the cosmos in bronze and wood, and then let it slip through their fingers. This is the story of the Antikythera Mechanism. This is the story of knowledge lost and found. This is the story of us. When the cosmos was a clockwork. To understand the Antikythera Mechanism, we must first travel back Not to the moment of its creation, we'll arrive there soon enough, but further, back to the birth of wonder itself. Close your eyes and imagine. It's a warm night in ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps 5,000 years before the mechanism was built, before Greece existed as anything more than scattered villages, before Rome was even a dream. A shepherd sits on a hillside, watching his flock, and looks up. The sky is a river of light, stars beyond counting, dense and bright in ways we can barely imagine now with our light-polluted modern skies. The Milky Way is a glowing band so vivid it casts shadows, and the shepherd notices something. Most of the lights in the sky stay fixed in their patterns. Night after night, they rise and set together, turning in a great wheel around a single point. The constellations the shepherd has learned from his father, the bull, the lion, the twins. They never change their shapes or positions relative to each other. They are the fixed stars, eternal and unchanging. But there are a few lights that wander, 7 of them to be precise. They move through the fixed patterns, travelling through the same narrow band of sky, month after month, year after year. Sometimes they move quickly, sometimes slowly. Sometimes they seem to stop, move backward for a time, then continue forward again. These are the wandering stars, the planets, from the Greek word planets, wanderer, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, 7 wanderers in the cosmic dance. And ancient people, these supposedly primitive ancestors of ours, became obsessed with understanding their movements, because they noticed something else too. The wanderers seemed to influence events on Earth. When certain planets aligned, floods came. When Venus appeared as the morning star, it was time to plant. When Mars glowed bright and red, wars erupted. This wasn't superstition, not at first. It was observation, pattern recognition, the earliest form of science. The heavens were a calendar, a clock, a book written in light that told the story of the seasons, the floods, the migrations of animals, the best times to plant and harvest. If you could read that book, you could predict the future, from Babylon to Egypt, from India to China. Every ancient civilization that developed writing turned its attention to the sky. They built observatories. They kept meticulous records. They tracked the wanderers with dedication that bordered on religious fervour, because in truth it was religious. The line between astronomy and astrology hadn't yet been drawn. The heavens were divine, and understanding them meant understanding the will of the gods. But then came the Greeks. Around the 6th century BCE, something remarkable began happening in the Greek-speaking cities scattered across the Mediterranean and Aegean. A new kind of thinking emerged, philosophers, literally lovers of wisdom, who started asking a different kind of question. Not what do the gods want, but how does it work? Thales of Miletus, one of the first, proposed that the universe operated by natural laws, not divine whim. He predicted an eclipse, not through prayer or prophecy, but through calculation. The heavens, he suggested, were not random or capricious. They were predictable. Pythagoras discovered that musical harmony could be expressed in mathematical ratios. The cosmos, he taught, was fundamentally mathematical. Numbers weren't just tools for counting sheep, they were the language of reality itself. The planets, he believed, made music as they moved through space. The music of the spheres, inaudible to human ears but mathematically perfect. Then came Plato, who insisted that the heavens moved in perfect circles, not spirals or ellipses or irregular paths, circles. Because circles were perfect and the heavens must be perfect, this belief, beautiful but wrong, would dominate astronomy for 2,000 years. But it also inspired a challenge. If the planets are moving in perfect circles, why do they appear to move irregularly? Why the backward motion? Why the varying speeds? Save the appearances, Plato challenged his students. Find the geometric model, the combination of circular motions, that explains what we observe. And they tried. They tried brilliantly. Eudoxus created a model with 27 interconnected celestial spheres, each rotating at different speeds. Aristotle expanded it to 55 spheres. These weren't just theoretical exercises. These were genuine attempts to create a mathematical model of the cosmos, to build, in thought, a machine that replicated the heavens. But the breakthrough came with a man named Apollonius of Perga, around 200 BCE. He introduced the epicycle, the idea that planets moved in circles whose centers themselves moved in circles around the Earth. Suddenly, the backward motion made sense. The varying speeds made sense. You could calculate where a planet would be on any given night, months, or years in advance. The cosmos wasn't chaos. It was a mechanism. And if it was a mechanism, perhaps it could be modelled with actual gears. This is the world into which the Antikythera Mechanism was born. A world of philosopher-engineers, of mathematical astronomers, of people who saw no contradiction between theory and practice, between pure knowledge and practical application. We know from ancient texts that such devices existed. Cicero, the Roman statesman and philosopher, wrote about a sphere built by Archimedes that replicated the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Archimedes himself, that legendary genius who supposedly held off a Roman fleet with mirrors and catapults, who discovered the principle of buoyancy while taking a bath, and ran naked through the streets shouting, "Eureka!" Archimedes built astronomical models, but we had no physical evidence. The texts describe wonders, but texts can exaggerate, they can invent. Without archaeological proof, modern scholars assumed these spheres were simple devices, perhaps armillary spheres, arrangements of rings showing the celestial circles, educational tools, not calculating machines. And then came the corroded lump from the shipwreck, item 5287. The first person to truly examine it closely was a Greek archaeologist named Valerios Stais. In 1902, 2 years after the discovery, he noticed the gears. He published a brief paper suggesting it might be some kind of astronomical calculator. His colleagues mostly ignored him. A few suggested it was too sophisticated to be ancient. It must be medieval or even modern. For decades, the mechanism sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, a curiosity that didn't fit any category. World War I came and went. The museum's focus remained on the spectacular bronze and marble statues from the wreck, which travelled to exhibitions around the world. The corroded gears stayed in storage, but a few researchers couldn't let it go. In the 1950s, a British science historian named Derek J. de Solla Price began what would become his life's work, Understanding the Antikythera Mechanism. Price was perfect for the task. He had training in both physics and the history of science. He understood gearing mechanisms and ancient astronomy. And he had the patience of a saint, because this mystery would take decades to unravel. Price obtained permission to X-ray the fragments. Remember, this is the 1950s and 60s. No CT scans, no 3D modelling, no computer analysis. Just X-ray film and Price's dogged determination to understand what he was seeing. What he discovered astonished him. This wasn't a simple device. The mechanism contained at least 30 interlocking gears, arranged in multiple layers. The gear teeth were precisely cut, triangular in profile, designed to mesh smoothly. The ratios between different gears matched specific astronomical cycles. This was deliberate, purposeful engineering at the highest level. Price published his findings in 1974 in an article titled Gears from the Greeks. He proposed that the mechanism was used to calculate the positions of the sun, moon, and possibly the planets. It could predict eclipses. It might have been used for astrology or for setting festival dates, or simply as a display of technical prowess. The academic response was mixed. Some praised Price's detective work. Others remained sceptical. The mechanism was so far beyond anything else that survived from antiquity that it seemed like an anomaly, an outlier, perhaps the work of a single genius that left no legacy. One ancient iPhone in a world of stone tablets. But Price had opened a door, and behind that door lay depths no one had imagined. Because the Antikythera Mechanism wasn't the work of a single genius. It was the culmination of a tradition, a school of thought, a lost science. Let us step back and paint the world as it was around 100 BCE, when the mechanism was likely built. Greece itself was no longer independent. Rome had conquered the Greek mainland, but Greek culture, Greek philosophy, art, science and technology had conquered Rome intellectually. Every wealthy Roman wanted Greek tutors for their children, Greek doctors, Greek architects, Greek engineers. And in the Eastern Mediterranean, in places like Alexandria, Rhodes, Pergamon, and countless other cities, Greek culture still thrived. These were places of astonishing learning. The Library of Alexandria supposedly held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the accumulated knowledge of the known world. The Mouseion, the great research institution attached to it, employed scholars in every field imaginable. Engineers there built water clocks of incredible complexity, automated theatres where mechanical figures acted out myths powered by water, weights and gears. Ctesibius, a brilliant inventor, created water organs, force pumps and pneumatic devices. Hero of Alexandria would later write books describing hundreds of mechanical devices, automated doors that opened when fires were lit on altars, vending machines that dispensed holy water for a coin, steam-powered toys. This was a culture that loved mechanisms, that saw no shame in manual work, in getting their hands dirty with bronze and wood, that celebrated cleverness and ingenuity as much as philosophical wisdom. The gearing technology existed, the astronomical knowledge existed, the mathematical ability existed, and somewhere, probably on the island of Rhodes, based on clues we'll discuss later, someone brought it all together. They took gears like those used in watermills and military catapults. They combined them with astronomical calculations developed over centuries. They inscribed instructions on bronze plates in lettering so small it was barely readable, cramming as much information as possible into a portable package about the size of a shoebox. They created a device that could take a single input, turn a crank on the side, and output multiple astronomical predictions simultaneously. Where the sun and moon would be in the zodiac, what phase the moon would be in, when eclipses would occur, visible from which locations, when the Pan-Hellenic Games would take place, the Olympics, the Pythian Games, the Nemean Games, all from gears and mathematics, all from human ingenuity. But who built it, and why? These are questions we may never fully answer. No maker's mark survived, no invoice or purchase order. No ancient text says, "And then I commissioned an astronomical calculator from the workshop of Name." But we have clues. The mechanism includes calendar systems specific to Corinth and its colonies, Syracuse, for instance. It uses month names from Corinthian calendars. And astronomical observations seem calibrated for latitudes around Rhodes or northern Greece. Some scholars believe it was built on Rhodes, perhaps in the tradition of the great astronomer Hipparchus, who worked there in the 2nd century BCE. Hipparchus was a genius. He created the first comprehensive star catalogue, discovering the precession of the equinoxes. He developed trigonometry. He calculated the distance to the moon with remarkable accuracy. If anyone had the knowledge to design something like the Antikythera Mechanism, it was Hipparchus or his students. Others suggest it might have been built in Syracuse, the city of Archimedes, which had a tradition of mechanical engineering. But here's what matters. It wasn't unique. We know from ancient texts that multiple such devices existed. The Roman general Marcellus supposedly brought 2 astronomical spheres back from Syracuse after conquering it in 212 BCE, over a century before our mechanism was built. Cicero saw one personally and described it in detail. This was a tradition, a school, a technology that multiple workshops knew how to produce. And then it vanished. The ship carrying our mechanism sank. The workshops that produced others like it faded away. The knowledge of how to create such complex gearing systems, how to calculate the necessary ratios, how to miniaturize the mechanisms, all of it disappeared into the chaos of history. Rome conquered the Mediterranean, but Romans were builders and administrators, not theoretical scientists. They built aqueducts and roads, amphitheatres and bathhouses. But they didn't build calculating machines. They didn't particularly value abstract astronomy. They wanted astrologers to predict their fates, not mathematicians to explain orbital mechanics. Christianity rose with its focus on the soul rather than the natural world, on salvation rather than scientific inquiry. The Library of Alexandria burned, probably in multiple events over several centuries, but burn it did. The schools of philosophy in Athens were closed by Christian emperors. The Museion faded. By 400 CE, the knowledge of how to build an Antikythera mechanism was gone. The very concept that such things were possible was forgotten. For 1,000 years, European astronomy regressed. Scholars debated how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, not how many teeth a gear needed to model the moon's orbit. The gears stopped turning. The calculations ceased, and humanity entered a long night, forgetting that once we reached for the stars and touched them with bronze. Mysteries in the deep. The 20th century dawned with electricity and automobiles, with radios and airplanes. Humanity was inventing the future, proud of its progress, confident in its unprecedented advancement. The ancient world seemed distant, quaint, a time of myth and marble, of philosophy and poetry, but certainly not of sophisticated technology. And then sponge divers pulled up gears from the seafloor. The cognitive dissonance was profound. How could the ancient Greeks, who supposedly calculated with pebbles and used slaves for manual labour, have created something this complex? It violated the narrative of progress that the modern world had constructed, the comforting story that technology advanced in a straight line from primitive simplicity to modern complexity. The Antikythera Mechanism suggested something more troubling, that knowledge could be lost, that civilizations could possess capabilities, then forget them, that we weren't necessarily smarter than our ancestors, just luckier in what survived. Valerios Stice's initial identification of the gears was published in 1902. The response from the international scholarly community ranged from skeptical to dismissive. Some suggested it was planted by modern divers as a hoax. Others insisted it must date from much later, perhaps the Middle Ages, somehow incorporated into the ancient shipwreck by chance. The problem was that the corroded fragments looked wrong, too advanced, too precise. Ancient people were supposed to make pottery and sculptures, not gear mechanisms with differential gearing and epicyclic gears, concepts that wouldn't be invented again until the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Admiral John Theophanides, a Greek naval officer with an interest in archaeology, examined the fragments in the 1930s. He confirmed the presence of Greek inscriptions and astronomical symbols, the zodiac, planetary names. This was definitely ancient, but his findings, published in Greek journals, received little international attention. World War II intervened, bringing its own catastrophe of knowledge destruction. Libraries burned, museums were looted, scholars died or fled. The Antikythera Mechanism survived the war safe in its museum, still unexplained, still waiting. Then came Derek Price. Imagine him. A British academic in his 30s, trained in physics and mathematics, who became fascinated with the history of scientific instruments. He had studied astrolabes and sundials, medieval astronomical clocks, and Renaissance automata. But nothing in his research prepared him for what he found when he first examined the Antikythera fragments in the 1950s. Price secured permission to X-ray the remains. The museum had Fragment A, the largest piece, containing most of the surviving gears. Fragment B contained more gears. Fragment C had inscribed plates. There were dozens of smaller fragments, each one a puzzle piece in a picture no one could see. The first X-rays were revelatory and frustrating in equal measure. Price could see gears, dozens of them, layered on top of each other, their teeth still clearly visible despite 2 millennia of corrosion. But understanding their relationships, how they meshed together, how they moved, that required detective work of the highest order. For 20 years, Price worked on the mechanism. He made detailed drawings of the gears from the X-rays, counting teeth, measuring diameters, calculating ratios. He spent hours in libraries, reading ancient Greek texts on astronomy, trying to understand what astronomical cycles these particular gear ratios might represent. The breakthrough came when he identified a 127-tooth gear. That number was significant. The Moon's orbital period relative to the stars, its sidereal month, is approximately 27.3 days. The time between successive full moons, the synodic month, is approximately 29.5 days. Ancient astronomers knew that 19 solar years contained almost exactly 235 lunar months. This is called the Metonic cycle, named after the Greek astronomer Meton, who popularized it in 432 BCE. But there's another lunar cycle that was crucial for eclipse prediction, the Saros cycle. Every 18 years, 11 days and 8 hours, approximately 223 lunar months, the Sun, Earth and Moon return to roughly the same relative positions. Eclipses repeat on the Saros cycle. If you know when an eclipse occurred, you can predict the next one 18 years later, and 223 divided by 19. The ratio is close to numbers Price was seeing in the gear arrangements. He began to understand. This wasn't just a planetarium showing the current positions of celestial bodies. It was a calculating machine using gear ratios to mechanically compute astronomical cycles discovered through centuries of observation. Turn the input crank 1 full rotation and the mechanism advances the date by 1 year, or 1 month, or 1 day, depending on how you used it. Gears meshed in specific ratios would move other gears, which moved dials, which showed the positions of the Sun and Moon through the zodiac, the phase of the Moon, the dates of likely eclipses. Price published his groundbreaking paper, Gears from the Greeks, in the journal Science in 1974. It was a sensation in certain circles. Historians of science and technology hailed it as revolutionary. But many classicists remained skeptical. The mechanism was still too anomalous, too isolated. Where were the workshops that produced such things? Where were the texts describing them? Where were the other examples? Price himself struggled with these questions. He wrote, "Finding a thing like this is like finding a jet plane in the tomb of King Tutankhamun." That quote captures both the wonder and the problem. The Antikythera mechanism didn't fit. It suggested a level of technological sophistication that didn't match the archaeological record as it was then understood. And Price didn't have all the answers. His X-rays were limited by 1960s technology. He couldn't see all the gears clearly. He couldn't read most of the inscriptions, which were too corroded and too small. He proposed functions for the mechanism that were partially correct, but incomplete. When Price died in 1983, many questions remained unanswered. The mechanism sat in the museum, better understood than before, but still deeply mysterious, still challenging our assumptions, still waiting. Let's pause here and consider what the mechanism's existence meant for how we understand ancient technology. We have this tendency, deeply embedded in modern thought, to divide history into ages. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Ancient, Medieval, Modern. We imagine technological progress as a ladder, each rung representing advancement. Once you climb to a higher rung, you never fall back down. But history isn't a ladder. It's more like a web or a river delta with countless branches. Some branches flow strong and wide, carrying knowledge and innovation forward. Others narrow, slow, disappear into sand. Sometimes the main channel shifts entirely, and what was once a mighty stream becomes a forgotten tributary. The ancient Greeks had knowledge of gearing that was lost and wouldn't be recovered in Europe until the 14th century. They had mechanical computers, but they also didn't have printing presses, so knowledge depended on hand-copied manuscripts that could burn. They didn't have widespread literacy beyond elite classes. They didn't have the scientific method as we understand it, the rigorous experimental approach that would emerge in the Renaissance. They reached incredible heights in some areas while remaining primitive in others. Just like us, actually. We can build smartphones but haven't solved poverty. We can split atoms but struggle to live sustainably. Progress in one domain doesn't guarantee progress in all domains. The mechanism also tells us something about the relationship between theory and practice in the ancient world. We often imagine ancient philosophers as purely abstract thinkers, sitting in marble halls, debating ideas. But the people who built the Antikythera Mechanism were getting their hands dirty. They were filing bronze, cutting gear teeth, testing prototypes, dealing with friction and manufacturing tolerances. They were engineers, and the boundary between engineer and philosopher was much more porous than we often assume. Archimedes was both. Hero of Alexandria was both. The person who designed the mechanism, they understood Hipparchus's astronomical theories deeply enough to translate them into a mechanical device. Theory and practice, hand and mind, working together. This integration was lost in later centuries. Medieval European scholars often looked down on manual labour. The Church emphasised spiritual matters over material ones. When mechanical clocks finally appeared in the 14th century, complex devices with gears and escapements that in some ways resembled the Antikythera mechanism, they were built by craftsmen who often couldn't read the scholarly astronomical texts, while scholars who could read the text often disdained actual mechanical work. The Greeks, or at least some Greeks, didn't have that divide, and it made them capable of extraordinary things. As the 20th century drew to a close, new technologies emerged that would finally unlock the mechanism's deepest secrets. In 2005, a team of international researchers, led by mathematician Tony Freeth, began a comprehensive new study. They brought equipment that Price could only have dreamed of, a custom-built CT scanner that could create detailed 3D images of the fragments, showing internal structure without disassembly. A surface imaging system that could capture inscriptions too faint for the naked eye. The results were stunning. The team discovered gears Price had never seen. They found inscriptions everywhere, on the faces of the dials, on internal plates, even between gears. More than 3,000 characters of Greek text, an instruction manual of sorts explaining what the device showed and how to interpret it. They discovered that the mechanism was even more sophisticated than Price imagined. It didn't just show the Sun and Moon's positions. It displayed all 5 planets known to antiquity: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It had a dial showing the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period that reconciles solar and lunar calendars. Another dial showed the Saros cycle for eclipse prediction, but not just when eclipses would occur. Where they would be visible from, whether lunar or solar, what time of day or night. There was even a subsidiary dial showing a 4-year cycle, the Olympiad, the period between Olympic Games. This wasn't just a scientific instrument, it was a complete astronomical and calendrical calculator. a device that demonstrated the order of the cosmos while serving practical purposes for festival planning, agricultural timing, and astrological consultation. And the gearing was brilliant. The team found evidence of differential gearing, a technique where two inputs combine to produce an output, like in a modern car's differential that allows wheels to turn at different speeds while cornering. This was supposed to have been invented in the 16th century, but here it was, in bronze, from 100 BCE, used to calculate the moon's variable motion across the sky. The moon doesn't orbit Earth in a perfect circle. Its orbit is slightly elliptical, so it appears to move faster or slower at different parts of its cycle. Ancient astronomers knew this, and whoever built the mechanism knew how to model it mechanically. The precision required was extraordinary. Gear teeth had to be cut within fractions of a millimetre for the device to work. The gear ratios had to match astronomical cycles to high accuracy. The metal had to be strong enough to withstand turning, yet workable enough to shape. The assembly had to fit in a wooden box small enough to transport. This required machine tools, lathes, files, dividing engines to mark gear teeth evenly. It required metallurgical knowledge to create bronze with the right properties. It required mathematical ability to calculate gear ratios from astronomical periods. It required astronomical observations accumulated over centuries. It required, in short, a mature technological tradition. Not one genius inventor, but generations of refinement. As each new discovery was announced, 2006, 2008, 2012, 2021, the mechanism became headline news. Ancient Greek iPhone, some articles called it, inaccurately but evocatively. The world's first computer. 2,000-year-old calendar computer. The public was fascinated. Here was concrete proof that ancient people were far more sophisticated than we'd believed. The mechanism appeared in documentaries, museum exhibitions, novels, and films. Hobbyists built reconstructions. Computer scientists created simulations. The Antikythera Mechanism became a symbol of lost knowledge, of ancient wisdom, of capabilities forgotten and rediscovered. But it also became fodder for pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. Some claimed it proved ancient aliens visited Earth, gifting technology humans couldn't have developed alone. Never mind that we have clear evidence of the mathematical and astronomical knowledge needed to build it, that ancient Greek texts discuss such devices, that we can trace the development of the necessary techniques. The alien theorists preferred mystery to explanation. Others connected it to Atlantis or other lost civilizations, suggesting it was a relic of a global prehistoric high-tech society destroyed by cataclysm. Again, never mind that the mechanism is clearly Greek in language, calendar systems, and astronomical observations. Never mind that it fits perfectly within the context of Hellenistic science and technology. The fantasy of a lost golden age was more appealing than the reality of cyclical history. These theories miss the truly profound implications of the mechanism. We don't need aliens or Atlantis to explain it. We just need to acknowledge that ancient people were as intelligent, creative, and capable as we are, that they achieved remarkable things with the materials and knowledge they had, that the difference between ancient and modern isn't one of cognitive ability, but of accumulated knowledge and available resources. The Antikythera Mechanism is humbling precisely because it's real, because it proves that humans, without computers or electricity, without modern mathematics or the scientific method, could still decode the cosmos and build machines to model it, because it shows that knowledge can be lost entirely, not just temporarily misplaced, but genuinely forgotten for over a millennium. And we might never know what else vanished with it. How many other mechanisms were built and lost? How many techniques were forgotten when the workshops closed? What other capabilities did ancient civilizations possess that we've only glimpsed or never discovered at all? The research continues. As of 2021, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project team now working with the University of London, announced they had identified how the mechanism displayed planetary positions. This had been the missing piece. Price knew there must be gearing for the planets, but the fragments were too damaged to reconstruct. Using ancient Greek astronomical theories, particularly those of Parmenides and later Babylonian period relations, the team proposed a gearing system that would have fit in the available space and matched the tooth counts on surviving gear fragments. They even built a working model. The planets don't move steadily across the sky. Sometimes they appear to move forward through the zodiac. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes they move backward. Retrograde motion. This happens because we're observing them from Earth, which is also moving. Ancient astronomers didn't know about planetary orbits around the Sun, but they developed mathematical models that predicted these apparent motions remarkably well. And the Antikythera mechanism could demonstrate them. Turn the crank, watch the dials, and see Mercury and Venus stay close to the Sun as they should, while Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn wander more widely. See them slow, stop, reverse, continue. See the geometric cosmos in motion, rendered in bronze. If the reconstruction is correct, and it seems likely, then the mechanism was a complete portable planetarium and calendar system, a device that could answer almost any astronomical question someone in 100 BCE might ask. When is the next eclipse? What zodiac sign is the moon in? When are the next Olympic Games? Where will Jupiter be next year? When should we plant crops based on the lunar calendar? All answered by turning a crank and reading dials. Remarkable, extraordinary, humbling, and lost. Completely lost, until sponge divers found it covered in barnacles and coral. We must sit with this loss, not gloss over it, not rationalize it, but truly comprehend what it means. For over 2,500 years, no one in Europe could build a device approaching the complexity of the Antikythera mechanism. The knowledge simply didn't exist. Medieval astronomical instruments, astrolabes, quadrants, armillary spheres, were sophisticated in their own ways, but they weren't calculating machines. They didn't use gearing to compute astronomical positions. Not until the 14th century did mechanical clocks with complex gear trains appear in Europe. Not until the 16th century did automata and mechanical calculators begin to be built. And even then, early examples were cruder than the Antikythera mechanism had been 1,600 years earlier. What happened? How did the knowledge disappear? What the gears remember. The loss of the Antikythera mechanism's technology wasn't a sudden catastrophe. There was no single moment when workshops burned and the knowledge died. Instead, it was a slow fade, a gradual forgetting as economic, social, and cultural conditions changed, as the people who valued such devices disappeared, as the chain of master to apprentice broke. Understanding this loss helps us understand something crucial about civilization itself, that it's fragile. That knowledge persists only when conditions support its transmission. That technology requires not just inventors, but whole ecosystems, patrons to fund development, craftsmen to build prototypes, customers to purchase finished devices, scholars to refine the theories, schools to train the next generation. Break any link in that chain, and the knowledge can disappear within a generation or two. So what broke the chain that led to the Antikythera mechanism? First, consider the cost. Building such a device required expensive materials, bronze, wood, possibly gold or silver for decoration. It required skilled labour, months of work by craftsmen who could file gears to precise specifications, who could inscribe tiny Greek letters on bronze plates. It required astronomical knowledge, access to scholars who understood the calculations. This was luxury technology. Only the wealthy could afford it. Kings, perhaps, wealthy aristocrats, major temples, but not ordinary people. Compare this to something like pottery. Even the poorest household needs pottery, so there's constant demand. a huge market supporting countless workshops. Skills pass from generation to generation because there are always buyers, always work. But a device that costs as much as a ship, that serves the specialized purpose of astronomical calculation, the market is tiny. A handful of workshops, maybe less. When Rome conquered the Greek East, the flow of wealth changed. Greek cities were taxed to support Roman administration. Greek treasuries were looted to fund Roman building projects. The Greek aristocrats who might have commissioned astronomical mechanisms were replaced by or subordinated to Roman elites, whose interests lay elsewhere. And Romans, as a culture, valued different things. They were brilliant engineers in their own right. Aqueducts, concrete, roads, military technology. But they weren't particularly interested in theoretical astronomy. They wanted astrologers to read omens, not mathematicians to calculate eclipses. They built colosseums and bathhouses, not computing devices. The market for mechanisms dried up, workshops closed, craftsmen moved to other trades or took their skills to their graves. Second, consider the materials. Bronze is valuable. It can be melted down and reused. Ancient devices that weren't lost in shipwrecks or buried in collapsed buildings were probably recycled centuries ago. How many mechanisms might have existed? Dozens? Hundreds? We'll never know because they were melted to make coins or statues or weapons. The Antikythera mechanism only survives because it sank. The sea preserved it through corrosion and burial. Every other example, if they existed, was probably destroyed by the very civilization that valued metal more than the knowledge encoded in its shape. Third, consider the knowledge base. The astronomical theories that underlay the mechanism's design were recorded in texts, papyrus scrolls in libraries. But papyrus is fragile. It rots in humidity, burns in fires, tears and fades with handling. Books must be copied continuously to survive, and copying requires someone who values the content enough to do the work. As the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, priorities changed. Monasteries copied religious texts, the Bible, the Church Fathers, commentaries on Scripture. But pagan astronomical treatises, mathematical works by Greek scientists, these weren't seen as essential. Many weren't copied. Libraries declined. The Great Library of Alexandria, repository of so much ancient knowledge, was damaged or destroyed in multiple incidents, its holdings scattered or lost. By 400 CE, the philosophical schools of Athens were in decline. By 529 CE, the Emperor Justinian closed them entirely. The Museion of Alexandria was gone. The tradition of Greek mathematical astronomy didn't die overnight, but it faded. In the East, some knowledge survived, passed to Islamic scholars who would preserve and expand upon it. But in Europe, astronomical knowledge regressed dramatically. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, consider cultural values. The Antikythera mechanism represented a worldview, that the cosmos was ordered, predictable, mechanical, that human reason could comprehend divine creation, that studying nature was a worthy pursuit in itself, not just for practical benefits, but for the sheer wonder of understanding. But Christianity emphasized different values: faith over reason, humility over pride in human achievement, salvation over worldly knowledge. The cosmos was God's creation, inscrutable and wonderful, precisely because it exceeded human understanding. To claim you could predict the heavens with a machine might be seen as hubris, as usurping God's prerogative. This is simplifying, of course. Some Christian scholars were deeply interested in astronomy. Calculating the date of Easter required astronomical knowledge. Monasteries preserved some classical texts. But the overall cultural shift was real. The pursuit of natural philosophy for its own sake, the integration of theory and practice, the celebration of clever mechanical devices, these declined. And so the gears stopped turning. The workshops closed. The skills were forgotten. The very idea that the ancients could build computing devices faded from memory. For more than 1,000 years, the Antikythera Mechanism had no descendants. The tradition was broken, the knowledge lost. But here's where the story takes a turn toward hope, toward revelation. Because knowledge, once discovered, can be rediscovered. The path forward isn't easy. It requires the right conditions, dedicated individuals, accidents of preservation. But it's possible. The gears can turn again. The rediscovery began, as we've seen, with sponge divers and archaeologists in 1900, but it accelerated dramatically with the application of 21st century technology to the ancient artifact. X-ray computed tomography, 3D modelling, surface scanning, digital epigraphy. Tony Freeth and his team didn't just study the mechanism, they virtually rebuilt it, gear by gear, inside computers. They tested hypotheses by creating simulations. They collaborated across disciplines, mathematicians and archaeologists, astronomers and engineers, classicists and computer scientists. And they discovered that our ancestors were brilliant, more brilliant than we'd given them credit for. The differential gearing for the moon's variable motion. That required solving a problem that wouldn't be rigorously addressed again until Kepler and Newton. But the ancient builders found a mechanical solution. The epicyclic gearing for planetary motion? It embodied geometric models that we now know were approximations of elliptical orbits, but they worked. Modern reconstructions of the mechanism, built by researchers and enthusiasts, actually function. You can turn the crank and watch the ancient cosmos unfold, watch eclipses predict themselves, watch the Olympiad cycle tick through its 4-year rhythm. The ancient calculator calculates. But the true revelation isn't just that the mechanism worked, it's what its existence implies about the nature of knowledge and civilization. We live in an age that assumes progress is inevitable, that technology advances inexorably forward, that what we know now we'll always know. We've grown complacent, perhaps, in our digital age. We store our knowledge on servers and in clouds, assuming it's permanent. But the Antikythera Mechanism whispers a warning. It can all be lost. Not in some apocalyptic catastrophe necessarily, though that's possible, but through gradual decline, through changing priorities, through economic shifts that make specialized knowledge unprofitable, through cultural transformations that devalue certain types of understanding. Imagine, 1,000 years from now, archaeologists excavating our cities. They find smartphones, millions of them, in landfills and ruins. But the screens are dead, the chips are corroded, the software is gone, the server farms are collapsed. The internet is a fading memory in texts that barely survived. Could those future archaeologists reconstruct what a smartphone could do? Could they understand the technology, the infrastructure, the knowledge base required to create and maintain such devices? Would they believe us capable of it, or would they think the story's exaggerated? This isn't pessimism. It's realism grounded in history. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is preserved or lost based on contingent factors. The Antikythera Mechanism survived by accident, a shipwreck in the right place at the right time, discovered by divers who brought it to archaeologists who eventually recognized its significance. How many other mechanisms sank in the wrong place, too deep to find? How many were melted down? How many texts describing them burned? We'll never know what else we've lost. We can only marvel at what accidentally survived. But there's another revelation, equally important. The Antikythera Mechanism proves that human genius isn't modern, that our ancestors, with bronze and wood, with patience and mathematical insight, could achieve wonders. They weren't primitive, they weren't less intelligent. They were us, in different circumstances, with different resources, but equal in capacity. This should change how we view the past. Not as a foreign country populated by simpler people, but as a landscape of human achievement as rich and complex as our own. Those ancient engineers understood things we're only now rediscovering. Those astronomers made observations we respect 2,000 years later. Those craftsmen created works we still can't fully replicate. And if they could do all this without computers, without electricity, without the scientific method as we know it, what else might they have achieved that we haven't recognized? What other knowledge might be waiting in unexplored ruins, in untranslated texts, in artifacts we've misidentified? The Antikythera Mechanism isn't an anomaly. It's a glimpse, a window into a world of ancient technology that we're only beginning to appreciate. Recent archaeological discoveries support this. In 2010, researchers studying ancient Roman concrete found that it actually gets stronger with time, unlike modern concrete, which degrades. The Romans knew something about material science we forgot and are only now relearning. In 2012, analysis of the Baghdad Battery, a clay jar from the Parthian period, suggested it might have been used for electroplating gold onto copper, implying knowledge of electrochemistry nearly 2,000 years ago. In 2018, researchers confirmed that the Great Pyramid of Giza can focus electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers, a property that's unlikely to be accidental, suggesting ancient Egyptian knowledge of physics we're still unravelling. Each discovery like this forces us to revise our understanding, to become more humble about what we think we know, to recognise that ancient people were sophisticated in ways different from, but not inferior to, our own sophistication. The Antikythera Mechanism is the most dramatic example because it's so unambiguously high technology. There's no hand-waving away those gears, those calculations, that precision. This was a computer. A mechanical, analogue computer, but a computer nonetheless. And it was built by human hands and minds, in workshops long turned to dust, using knowledge painstakingly accumulated over generations, and then catastrophically lost. Let's bring this forward to the present moment. What does the Antikythera Mechanism mean for us now, in the 21st century? First, it's a reminder to preserve knowledge actively. We cannot assume that information will naturally persist. Libraries must be maintained. Skills must be taught. Technologies must be documented. The chain of transmission must be protected, generation after generation. In our digital age, this is both easier and harder. Easier because we can copy information infinitely, distribute it globally, store redundant backups. Harder because digital formats become obsolete, files become unreadable, websites disappear, platforms die. We're creating more information than ever before, but much of it might be inaccessible to future generations. How will people in 2500 CE read our websites if the internet doesn't exist? How will they run our software without compatible operating systems? How will they access knowledge stored in proprietary formats owned by companies that no longer exist? The Antikythera Mechanism was bronze, physical, tangible. It survived in a form that, with enough effort, could be studied and understood. Will our knowledge be so durable? Second, the mechanism reminds us to value knowledge for its own sake, not just its immediate utility. The ancient Greeks who built astronomical calculators weren't doing it for practical applications, ships navigated by stars. Yes, but they didn't need computers for that. Farmers needed calendars, but simpler ones sufficed. They built the mechanism because they valued understanding, because knowing how the cosmos worked was intrinsically worthwhile, because the pursuit of knowledge was a virtue. We need that spirit now. In an age that increasingly demands immediate returns on investment, practical applications for every discovery, profit from every innovation, we risk losing the spirit of inquiry that drives genuine breakthroughs. The Antikythera Mechanism was pure research turned into art, turned into technology. It served no essential function, but it represented the pinnacle of what its civilization could achieve. What are we building that serves no practical purpose, but demonstrates the heights of human capability? What knowledge are we pursuing simply because it's worth knowing? Third, the mechanism teaches humility. We are not the first technological civilization. We are not uniquely clever or advanced. We're standing on foundations laid millennia ago, and many of those foundations have crumbled, leaving us to rebuild from fragments and guesses. When we approach ancient cultures, we should do so with respect and curiosity, not condescension. When we find something that doesn't fit our expectations, an impossible artifact, an anachronistic technology, our first response shouldn't be to dismiss it or invoke aliens, but to revise our understanding. The ancients were us. We are them. The same species, same cognitive capacity, same creative drive. The only differences are circumstantial. What knowledge we inherited, what resources we possess, what challenges we face. If we remember this, we might avoid the hubris that leads civilizations to catastrophe, the belief that we've reached a pinnacle, that we're too advanced to fall, that our knowledge is secure. The Antikythera Mechanism whispers from the deep, you can forget. You can lose it all. Nothing is guaranteed. And that's not a message of despair. It's a message of responsibility. In 2021, new research suggested something fascinating. The Antikythera Mechanism might have been used as a teaching device. The inscriptions on it aren't just labels, they're explanatory texts describing astronomical phenomena, explaining how to interpret the dials. It's like a textbook built into the machine. Imagine a wealthy Greek household in 100 BCE. The family tutor brings out the mechanism. Students gather around as he turns the crank, showing how the moon's phases change, how eclipses occur, how the planets wander through the zodiac. He reads from the inscriptions, explaining the mathematics, the observations of generations of astronomers, the geometric models that make it all work. The mechanism becomes a gateway to understanding. Not just a calculator, but a teaching tool that makes abstract astronomical concepts tangible, visible, real. And perhaps that's the most profound purpose it served. Not predicting eclipses, though it could. Not setting festival dates, though it did. But inspiring wonder, demonstrating that the cosmos could be understood, showing that human intelligence could grasp divine patterns. The students who learned from such devices might grow up to be astronomers themselves, or philosophers, or engineers, or simply citizens who appreciated the beauty of mathematical astronomy, who valued the pursuit of knowledge, who supported the workshops and schools that preserved these traditions. Education is how knowledge persists. Each generation must learn from the previous one, then push forward, adding their own insights, refining techniques, asking new questions. The Antikythera Mechanism might have been part of that educational chain, a physical embodiment of accumulated wisdom, designed to inspire the next generation. When the chain broke, when the last students who learned from such devices grew old and died without passing on the knowledge, the technology was lost. The gears stopped turning. The cosmic dance continued in the heavens, but humanity forgot the steps. Until now. Until sponge divers and archaeologists, X-ray technicians and computer modelers, mathematicians and historians collaborated across time to recover what was lost. Until we became the students again, learning from bronze fragments what our distant ancestors once knew. The gears are turning again. Not physically. The original mechanism is too fragile, too precious to operate. But digitally, in simulations. Conceptually, in our minds. Educationally, as museums build recreations and documentary films explain its function to millions. The knowledge is spreading again. The wonder is returning. The revelation is ongoing. And perhaps that's the ultimate message of the Antikythera Mechanism, that knowledge lost can be found, that curiosity never dies, that each generation has the opportunity and the responsibility to rediscover, to relearn, to push forward into mysteries both ancient and new. The cosmos is still a mechanism, vast and intricate, operating by laws we're still unravelling. We've come far since the ancient Greeks gazed up at the stars and saw divine patterns. We know that Earth orbits the Sun, not the reverse. We know that the stars are distant suns. We know that the universe is far vaster and stranger than ancient cosmology imagined. But in another sense, we're still doing what those ancient astronomers did, observing, calculating, modelling, trying to understand the patterns that govern existence. The tools have changed. Telescopes instead of naked eyes, quantum computers instead of bronze gears. But the fundamental human drive to comprehend remains constant. The Antikythera Mechanism is a bridge across time, connecting us to ancestors who shared that drive, who looked at the same moon we see, walked under the same stars, wondered at the same cosmos, who built devices to make sense of it all, to bring order to chaos, to show that the universe could be known, and who succeeded magnificently before the knowledge slipped away into darkness. But darkness, we've learned, is not forever. The light returns, the gears turn, the calculations resume, the cosmos remembers in bronze and starlight, and so do we. The eternal return. We stand now where we began, at the edge of the sea, looking down into blue depths where secrets sleep. But we are changed by the journey. We've travelled 2,000 years through time, witnessed the rise and fall of knowledge, seen human genius preserved in bronze and lost to forgetting, then found again in fragments. The story of the Antikythera Mechanism is not just a story about an ancient device. It's a story about us, about humanity's eternal struggle to understand, to create, to preserve what we've learned and pass it forward. It's a story that repeats across time. Ancient Egypt built pyramids with astronomical alignments we still study. Then the knowledge of their construction techniques faded. The Library of Alexandria held uncounted treasures of wisdom, then burned. The Romans built aqueducts and concrete structures of incredible durability. Then the techniques were forgotten for centuries. Medieval engineers created astronomical clocks and mechanical marvels, but the craft died out. The Industrial Revolution brought steam power and machinery, but relied on fossil fuels we now know threaten our survival. Progress and loss, discovery and forgetting, the eternal cycle. But each turn of the cycle brings opportunity. The Antikythera Mechanism lay on the seafloor for 2 millennia, but it waited patiently for the moment when humanity would be ready to understand it again, when we'd have the technology to scan it, the knowledge to interpret it, the humility to accept what it told us about our ancestors. That moment came. We found it. We learned from it. And now we carry that knowledge forward, adding it to the accumulation of human understanding that defines our civilization. What else is waiting to be found? What other ancient technologies lie buried in ruins or sunken in the sea? What texts remain untranslated in museum storage? What capabilities did ancient people possess that we've never imagined? The Antikythera Mechanism teaches us to ask these questions with genuine curiosity rather than dismissive skepticism, to approach the past with respect, to recognize that ancient people solved problems brilliantly with the tools they had, and that we might learn from their solutions even now. It teaches us to preserve knowledge actively, not assume it will naturally persist, to value education, to maintain libraries and museums, to fund research that has no immediate profit motive but expands human understanding, to pass on skills and wisdom to the next generation, carefully and deliberately, because the chain of transmission is fragile. It teaches us humility, that we're not the pinnacle of human achievement, just the latest expression of a capacity that's existed for millennia, that civilizations can fall, knowledge can be lost, and nothing we've built is guaranteed to last. And it teaches us hope, that lost knowledge can be recovered, that human curiosity and ingenuity can rediscover ancient truths and build new understanding upon them, that each generation has the opportunity to learn from the past and create the future. Close your eyes one more time. Imagine you're standing in ancient Rhodes around 100 BCE. The sun is setting over the harbour, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. In a workshop nearby, a craftsman is filing bronze, carefully shaping gear teeth to precise specifications. His hands are skilled, his mind focused. He's part of a tradition stretching back generations, using knowledge accumulated over centuries. He's building a mechanism that will calculate the cosmos, that will predict eclipses and track planets, that will demonstrate in bronze and wood that the universe is knowable. He doesn't know that within a few generations his craft will begin to fade, that the workshops will close, the knowledge will be forgotten, that the device he's creating with such care will end up at the bottom of the sea, waiting for 2,000 years to be found. But he also doesn't know that it will be found, that future humans, with technologies he couldn't imagine, will study his work in wonder, that his achievement will inspire millions, teach new generations, reshape understanding of what ancient people could accomplish. He's building for the moment, for his clients, for his pride in craftsmanship, but he's also building for eternity, whether he knows it or not. Because true knowledge, encoded in bronze or stone or digital memory, transcends its creator. It becomes part of the human story, the accumulated wisdom of our species. We are all, in our own ways, that craftsman. We're all building something, knowledge, skills, art, ideas, that will outlive us. The question is, are we building things that will last? Are we preserving what we've learned? Are we passing on wisdom to those who come after? The Antikythera Mechanism says yes, we must. We must build, preserve, teach, and learn. We must value knowledge for its own sake. We must approach ancient mysteries with curiosity and respect. We must remember that civilizations are fragile, that nothing is guaranteed, that loss is always possible. But it also says yes, we can. We can rediscover what was lost. We can build upon ancient foundations. We can turn the gears again, both literally and metaphorically. We can connect past and future through the present moment of understanding. The sponge divers didn't know what they'd found in 1900. The archaeologists didn't fully understand it for decades, but they preserved it, studied it, eventually unlocked its secrets. And now we all benefit from their patience and dedication. What will future generations say about us? What knowledge are we preserving for them? What mysteries are we unravelling that they'll build upon? What devices are we creating that will astonish people 2,000 years from now? Or will they look back at our civilization with the same wondering sadness we feel looking at the Antikythera Mechanism, marvelling at what we achieved, but mourning all that was lost? The choice is ours. The gears are in our hands. The cosmos still turns, waiting to be understood. The ancient blueprint remains, calling us to remember, to rediscover, to rebuild. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than an artifact. It's a message across time, from ancestors who mastered the stars to descendants who must learn the lesson again. Knowledge is precious. Knowledge is fragile. Knowledge is worth preserving. The gears remember, even when we forget. Let us turn them again with wonder and wisdom, and pass the motion forward through time. The journey continues. The mystery deepens. The revelation awaits. And somewhere in the depths, in dark museums and buried ruins, in unread texts and unexplored sites, more secrets sleep, waiting for the moment when we're ready to find them, ready to understand them, ready to let them transform our understanding once more. Until then, the Antikythera Mechanism reminds us we are the inheritors of ancient genius. We are the guardians of fragile knowledge. We are the builders of tomorrow's mysteries. And we are all, every one of us, connected through time by the eternal human drive to understand the cosmos and our place within it. The gears turn, the stars shine, the wisdom endures. And we, modern seekers rediscovering ancient truths, we are the proof that knowledge, once created, never truly dies. It waits, it persists, it calls across millennia. Remember, rediscover, rebuild. The blueprint was never lost, just hidden, just waiting. And now we've found it again. Thank you for taking this journey through time, mystery, and revelation. May you carry forward the wonder, the curiosity, and the wisdom that the Antikythera Mechanism represents. May you preserve knowledge, seek truth, and never stop asking questions about the mysteries that surround us, ancient and modern alike. The cosmos is a mechanism. History is a cycle. Knowledge is a bridge across time. And you, curious seeker, fellow traveller through mystery, you are the living link in that eternal chain. Keep turning the gears. Keep asking questions. Keep the wonder alive. The ancient blueprint is revealed, the lost knowledge is found, and the journey never truly ends.